Take to the boat, Moose. Take to the boat. Come on, Moose.
Please, Lord, don't let him hit it to me. Oh, please. Don't hit it to me. Why me? Why me?
Listen up, fellow babies. It's time for another episode of Hold My Order, Terrible Dresser, the deep dive history nerd WKRP and Cincinnati podcast. I am Mike Grasso. With me, as always, Rob McDougall.
Hi, everybody.
And today we've got a couple of Season 2 episodes of WKRP, which I think we're going to have a lot of fun trying to decipher baseball and Bad Risk. And we're going to start with baseball, which I know, Rob, I've mentioned I've been waiting quite a while to do this episode. And it's a very basic, traditional sitcom plot.
It's extremely basic.
It is. It's extremely basic, but It revolves around the WKRP station personnel being challenged through the person of Les by WPIG to a softball game. We learn that WPIG is full of ringers and they've got a team that plays in the Cincinnati League, and in fact they even beat the Baptists last year, which I thought was a great little touch. And then we spend the next 20 or so minutes of the episode on the baseball diamond with our WKRP team.
We do. There's maybe a little, a 3-minute scene to set it all up.
Yep.
And then the opening song, right? That's before and then from then on, the whole thing is on the diamond.
Well, there's two plot lines here about sort of living up to athletic dreams of yesteryear, let's say. Les is obviously the obvious one. He's always been not very athletic, not very knowledgeable about sports, and so he ends up having to be moved around quite a bit on the diamond, which is always funny. And there's also Moose Carlson, which I thought was something actually I didn't remember from watching this when I was a kid, is that he's trying to relive his, glory days on the baseball diamond at his university, which I thought was a great B-plot for this episode.
Mr. Carlson played baseball in college, didn't you, sir?
Well, yeah.
They called him Moose, didn't they? He told me he was a great athlete. Shut up, Les.
Yeah, sure. Now, we'll go back and forth on the episode. I don't know if either of these rise to the level of plots. I mean, really, I just have to stress how kind of stripped down in terms of storytelling this episode is. There's the setup, and then we go to the baseball diamond. And basically, the episode is the game. I mean, we see an awful lot of the game.
Yes, it is.
And, of course, you can't fit a whole baseball game, even a 7-inning softball game, into a 26-minute sitcom. But there's a whole lot of just shots of Johnny catching a ball, or Venus hitting a ball, or Les not hitting a ball, and
Bucky Dornster making a great play while having a beer in his hand.
Bucky Dornster, right? And so, of course, that's the fun of the episode,
yes,
is just seeing everybody on the field. It's a fashion show. Everybody interprets, team uniform according to their own character. And so we have this great, this great parade of, they all manage to find a red t-shirt, but beyond that, there's no uniformity to their uniforms.
Really, Venus is the only one, kicking a real 1970s era baseball uniform, complete with stirrups, which I thought was a great
Complete
touch.
With stirrups, with tassers, and sort of...
And a scarf. He's got
a scarf, and he's got the satin baseball jacket and the batter's helmet, right?
Yeah.
But then, I don't know if we need to go through all of them, but Herb has his, Herb-esque pants. The big guy's wearing khakis.
Yeah.
Jennifer, of course, is wearing, my new red shorts. She says this is how she gets the guys to play. She's going to wear her little satin red shorts. Les is wearing his button-down shirt and bow tie under his t-shirt.
Yes, which is kind of like a great old-school 19th century old-timey baseball touch there,
All right, everybody, listen up here. I'm sports director of KRP, so naturally I'm the coach. In addition to that, I'll be pitching today. What? Now, please listen carefully. This is a 7-inning game. Slow pitch and no stealing. Now, Bailey, you'll lead us in a team prayer.
What?
Huh?
Well, why me?
Because you're the most wholesome.
Yeah, I suppose I am.
Go ahead, Bailey.
Well, Lord, help us.
Amen.
I liked this episode, Rob. I really enjoyed it, even on rewatch, even though I think it spoke to me more personally, when I was a kid, and we'll talk about that. But, I watched it twice, because I kind of wanted to get a sense of, like, what I could recreate the scorecard of the game, which is not possible.
It's not.
But you can definitely do a few of the innings, and, we'll post that up when this goes up to the
Good,
notes.
good.
I would love to talk about what worked for me in it, in the fact that, yes, this episode's basically the entire game. And it's very unusual and unlike a lot of the baseball episodes we've probably seen on sitcoms, where you maybe have the game in, like, the last third of the episode, and then the rest of the episode is, like, setting up the game.
Yeah, what I'm saying that is weird about this episode is that the usual way of using sports on TV is, in service to a dramatic storyline that is going on off the field.
Yes.
And then we have the moment of competition, the moment of truth, the sort of, and the rest is really kind of elided with a couple of montages and that sort of thing.
Yes.
And there are some montages in this episode, but really, we get it kind of blow by blow, beat by beat, and there's almost nothing else.
There's a lot of sight gags. There's a lot of sight gags and kind of personality gags about the various, people on the diamond. And that underserves a few of the players and a few of the characters. I mean, Bailey doesn't really get to do a lot.
Yeah.
Andy is there really to buck up Les, and kind of make sure his feelings don't get hurt by him being moved around a lot.
Les?
Andy, that guy tried to kill me.
Yeah, I know you did, Les. Hey, Les, how about trying to play first base?
Why?
Well, Pete Rose plays first base.
Okay.
Okay, had a boy. Hey, Bucky! Come on over here and play third base.
Andy.
Huh?
Where's first?
We've, as I mentioned, we've got Bucky, and he's kind of this savant, kind of baseball player. The drunker he gets, the better he gets.
Like Johnny.
Johnny in there, right, exactly. Johnny's, reaction time. Johnny just wants to kind of go out there and get some sun. He's not really interested in the game at all, but he'll throw in a few, pieces of advice on how to distract the batters by having Jennifer stand next to the big guy while he pitches.
Listen, you two, I'm really getting tired of this. Let me see the ball.
What for?
When you hold it, see, get your fingers on the laces. And when you release it right at the last minute, put a little backspin on it, see?
Oh, I've been throwing that sucker straight.
Sort of. I'm going to play first base. You work next to the moose. Now, whenever he pitches the ball, use your imagination. Give the batter a little wave, a little hip action, something.
All righty.
Come on, play ball. Hey, Bucky, you're up. Okay. Here, hold this.
Hey, man, don't you think you've had one too many?
Absolutely.
That's kind of the turning point where, Johnny's too cool to care. And then somewhere in the fifth inning or whatever, he decides to care. And that's kind of the turning point begins. Although I believe it's Bucky that turns the corner. It's Bucky that gets the first home run.
He's your rally guy. Yeah, exactly.
Starts the rally. Yeah.
Forget it? That's easy for you to say, Mr. Carlson. You were a baseball star. I bet all of you had a chance to play baseball when you were kids, didn't you? Dashing across those sparkling green diamonds under a summer sun, crunching through the autumn leaves, the smell of wood smoke in the air. Well, some of us weren't so lucky. No, sir. Some of us had to take violin lessons. Thousands of violin lessons. We never had a chance as children to play the great American pastime. What about us?
You mean, what about you?
All right, Herb. What about me?
I'll play Les.
You will, Bailey?
Me too.
Oh, thank you, Jennifer.
I know you've been looking forward to this episode, Mike, And I got to say, when I watched it, I was a little bit mystified at what its appeal might be, but I think that the key is that if I can, psychoanalyze you a little, that you imprinted on this episode at an early age. And so maybe you better explain to me, how this episode spoke to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, any nerdy kid who was really bad at sports is definitely going to identify with Les. We start off by learning that Les wasn't really invited to play any of the reindeer games when he was a kid because he was practicing his violin, and he really wanted to get out there and, play with the other kids and be a normal kid, and he wasn't able to. One of the most interesting things about that bullpen scene at the beginning of the episode that I noticed is that Les gets all poetic, it gets all Grantland Rice and sort of evokes the youth on a baseball field and how wonderful it is and how he didn't get to do that. And the interesting thing is when he says that, he says, didn't all of you get to play baseball as kids? And all of the guys nod.
Right.
He's standing in front of Jennifer and Bailey at that point. Mm-hmm. And after he evokes this, didn't yet you get to play, Jennifer and Bailey come in and say, you know what, Les? I think you've convinced me. We want to play too. And I wonder how much of it was Les's flowery language, but how much of it was Les basically evoking the idea of these couple of girls maybe who did want to play on boys' teams in the 50s and early 60s and weren't really allowed to. And so he creates allies out of these people who, these women at the station who maybe weren't, in that sort of like Sandlot league when they were kids.
Yeah, it is Bailey and Jennifer who sympathize with Les and are the first ones to come on side. And I think in Les's closing monologue, he says something about now girls today playing baseball, but it's not kind of front and center at the start like that.
It is interesting because, to be honest, girls have been playing baseball for 100 years or more. There were always leagues for girls and women. But the idea of them playing together, especially in like a little league situation, really didn't start until, I would say, probably the early 80s when they started making those younger team leagues, basically co-ed. But yeah, Les has these flashbacks to having to practice the violin throughout the latter part of the episode as he's standing out in right field, all forlorn. And for me, Rob, it wasn't practicing the violin. That would be almost too cliche. But, I was the fat nerdy kid. I was the Martin of my school. You know what I mean?
We'll see you when you get back from image enhancement camp.
Spare me your euphemisms. It's fat camp for Daddy's chubby little secret.
You promised you wouldn't make a scene.
One of the ways that you learn to survive in that kind of situation is maybe you don't play the sports, but maybe you become a fan of the sports. Yeah. And I think that both subconsciously and consciously, that was one of my ways of kind of surviving. Once I got to junior high and high school, all of a sudden there was an opportunity to write about sports or to talk about them as a fan. Again, and if you can't play, oftentimes you end up taking this side of it where you wax poetic about the beauty of a baseball diamond. And I think that all through my life, when I've been involved in casual athletic, sort of organized sports, I always think of Les out in right field.
Well, I have a lot of respect for that. I think in an early episode I said I had a lot of respect for you as a nerd who liked sports.
I remember that. Yes, I had a chuckle over that.
Because I was the skinny nerdy kid, and I was no good at baseball or team sports either. I understand the power of the nerd versus sports story. It works for me on a kind of, basic, I'm not a monster. Like, of course I feel something when the nerdy kid finally catches the ball. Charlie Brown, I root for Charlie Brown, and, it kind of works on a basic, like on my limbic brain level. Like I do get that, but
what you're trying to say, Rob, is that you didn't have people who bullied you at school because you weren't good at sports.
Well, I wasn't good, but maybe I wasn't bullied. That's right. I might have been. I think that I have some memories of striking out. It just, I sort of decided I wasn't good at it and it wasn't for me. And so I didn't become a sports fan, which continues, to this day to be, if you're an adult male in this society, like it just leads to all sorts of awkwardness. Like, I have to change barbers about every 6 months because it just gets too awkward to feign interest in sports conversations.
They're finished.
Look here, old fella, I know when a chap's cut my hair and when he hasn't, so will you please stop fooling around and get on with it?
Yes, I will, sir. I'm going to cut your hair, sir. Can I start cutting your hair, sir? Start cutting now.
Nice day, sir.
Yeah, sir. Flowers could do with a drop of rain there.
Did you see the match last night, sir?
Yeah, good game, I thought.
I thought Hurst played well, sir.
Beg your pardon?
I thought Hurst played well, sir.
Oh, yes. Only one who did that.
Can you put your head down a little, sir?
Oh, sorry.
I prefer to watch Palace nowadays, though. Oh, sorry, was that your ear?
Oh, no, didn't feel a thing.
Learning how to talk about sports is a survival tactic. I've heard this from several nerdy friends of mine that they work in either a male-dominated or they end up in sort of these male social groups at work, and they haven't been sports fans. And the one thing that they've learned in order to kind of fit in and be able to talk is that they've learned to talk at the basic level about sports.
Baseball is a 19th century pastoral game. Football is a 20th century technological struggle. Baseball is played on the diamond, in a park, the baseball park. Football is played on a gridiron in a stadium, sometimes called Soldier Field or War Memorial Stadium. Baseball begins in the spring, the season of new life. Football begins in the fall when everything is dying.
Well, so I think that's key to the episode, and probably key to your attachment to the episode then, is that it's not just that Les is lousy at baseball. It's that it's lousy at baseball, but he cares about baseball, and he doesn't understand baseball that much, but he's totally invested in the American myth of baseball, the pastoral myth of baseball. He gives that great speech, and there is this, as you say, there is this real tradition of intellectuals, writers, poets, genuflecting to American baseball in a way you don't see with other sports, really. Of course, there are some great writers on other sports, but there's a kind of a mythology of baseball. As a historian, it's every third male U.S. historian either has a baseball book they've written or a baseball book they want to write, right? That they everyone has this side, and there aren't shelves of hockey books or basketball books or football books in the same way. My kind of outsider's snide explanation for that is that there's a lot of time to sit and think when you're watching a baseball game.
I don't think that's snide. I think that's been accepted by a lot of these type writers. I think they realize that the pace of baseball lends itself really well to pontification, distraction, metaphor. I think these are all very, very, accepted reasons why baseball is a writer's and an intellectual sport. There are a couple of other sports I would say that have kind of elicited, let's say, poetic or epic level sort of, pontification on them in the past. I think boxing used to be one of those sports. Before the sort of obvious physical brutality of it became something that people couldn't cope with. It was the sweet science,
That's true. That's a weird one, because it seems like it's almost the opposite of baseball. With boxing, it might be that it needs that level of, that it takes a lot of intellectual work to turn it into something respectable.
That's exactly it. That level of abstraction is necessary to be able to really tolerate the idea of two men beating the living daylights out of each other in a ring. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would say that in England, cricket kind of fills a little bit of the role, but not it's more in a national myth way than this game necessarily like they always say baseball represents the best parts of America, right? It's supposed to be this team effort where individual effort can shine, right? I think in England, the cricket idea is basically just the idea of having a really well manicured lawn and having a nice drink on it. You know what I mean?
Headquarters of these urban idiots is here in St. John's Wood. Inside, they can enjoy the company of other idiots and watch special performances of ritual idioting.
Good afternoon and welcome to Lord's on the second day of the first test. So far today we've had 5 hours batting from England and already they are 0 for 0. And now it's Bo Hildeberg running in again to bowl to Cowdrey. He runs in, he bowls to Cowdrey, and no shot at all, a superb display of inertia there. And that's the end of the over, and drinks.
gin and tonic, please.
No, the players are having drinks.
Baseball always has this pastoral, supposed to be connected to small town America and that kind of thing. A lot of which is kind of a historical creation, because I think that baseball really emerges in 19th century New York, the sort of gangs of New York milieu with firefighters, deciding to play this game rather than beat each other up. But
it is. I mean, it's a quintessentially urban sport. It was born in the cities. It became centered around New York, as you say, not just in the amateur era, but eventually, New York had 3 teams, for the good part of the century. But they did have to usually go out to Brooklyn to play, which back then was pretty rural as all things go, you know.
This, then, was my finest moment. A thrilling, frightening event like this usually comes to boys, and now girls, when they are 11 or 12. For me, it would happen 27 years later. I am reminded that George Bernard Shaw didn't have his first great successful play until he was 49 years of age. Beethoven didn't write his Ninth Symphony, my personal favorite, until he was 53. I know now how these men must have felt. Beethoven was totally deaf at the time, by the way. Not everybody knows that.
Yeah, so like I say, I was no great athlete as a kid either, and I do understand the sort of mythic appeal of the nerd underdog catching the ball and winning the game. I'm not a monster. But this episode, if you watch this episode as an adult, separate from that, it asks an awful lot of you. And I just think that it's a weird piece of television that doesn't completely hang together. I really felt like it really just feels like you're watching somebody's home movies of like they went out and had fun.
And the next man wants to hit the ball too. And he does. And there he goes off in that direction. And everyone is happy.
Mom, why don't you let me call the game?
That's all right, dear. I can do it.
This episode was the first one filmed of the second season. So
sense.
Probably maybe don't even have the studio set up yet or something. And they're just like in the summer, the end of the summer, they just go out to whatever park and film this thing. Apparently it was super, super hot. And that day you could almost tell the quality of the light and everything. But yeah, I just find this a very strange episode. The pacing, the music. So this show about 70s rock, the music in here is like, it starts with harmonica and then it builds to it's bluegrass, banjo. It's like Country Pete and the Muddy Bottom Ramblers or something like that. It's a sort of strange, bluegrass accompaniment. The audio flashbacks, right? Les keeps hearing his mother's voice and the violin, which is just a level of subjectivity that we don't normally have on this show. These sort of reveries and things. And then it ends with a voiceover by Les, which, the show doesn't do voiceovers generally, and it ends with this sort of uplifting voice. It's just a weird episode. And if it didn't have that kind of, punch right to the feels of, Charlie Brown winning the game, it does not hold together in any other way. It just I find it bizarre.
Well, I think part of that is the fact that you're shooting on location. And I remember a lot of shows used to go out of the studio, maybe once a season or less, and they would go out and do an episode like this, or, the Cheers people are lost in Boston or something like that.
Yeah.
And it always felt a little strange because you can pace and set your marks in a studio so much easier than you can if you're on a... Now, there were no stunt actors in this. Everybody was doing their own hitting and fielding, so there's that, and nobody really looks like a great, baseball power out there, except maybe the ringers.
Some of the ringers on the WPIG team.
Yeah, exactly. But when Andy hits his single to left field, it's Gary Sandy actually hitting the ball. So how many takes did each of those little hits take? You know what I mean? But there were so many great little moments, Rob. There were, I think it was Herb was rounding second or taking his leadoff second, and Clark Callahan said something mean to him. He goes, Shirley. And you can barely hear it because again, it's sort of like audio on the field, and Bucky making the one-handed grab with the beer in his hand. Again, how many takes did it take? Was that Bill Dial?
That's
right?
Bill Dial, yeah.
To do that. I mean, there definitely were some weird moments for me. I watched the episode twice, like I mentioned, and during the first watch, I was like, oh man, listen to the bench on WKRP. They're like doing all that great baseball chatter. Yeah. But then I listened to it the second time and listened to the chatter, and it was just a few little segments of chatter that they kept like reworking and ADRing into the background.
Oh, really? Well, of course, this episode has canned laughter too, because of course there's no audience out there in the ballpark.
Right. Exactly.
So that changes makes the audio. It just adds to the unreality of this, or the weirdness of this compared to the other episodes. I guess.
Have to work hard at this episode if you want to enjoy it like I did. You have to kind of ferret out the little nuggets of humor in it, but they are there.
One more out and the game is over.
Well, I don't know how to tell you this, AC, but you're up.
It's Moose.
Listen, Callahan, I think your station stinks. I think your car stinks. I think your house stinks. I think you stink, Callahan! You got that?
Okay, everybody in! Come on in!
Hey, what's he doing?
The strikeout king is up. The game is over. Looks like he's calling in the outfield and the infield.
And we've talked a lot about Les, but let's give Moose Carlson his due, too, because his whole thing in this episode is that he's not as good an athlete as he was back when he was in college. Perfectly natural, right? He's over 40, as we've talked about before. But, he desperately wants to get one over on WPIG for the rivalry, but also for his own self-esteem, And that moment where they call in the entire, all the fielders, with the exception of the pitcher, obviously, and dare him to get a hit. First of all, it's classic hubris on the part of PIG, right? They just say, there's no way they can possibly win this. And then, of course, he ends up going up 10-9. But then there's that thing where the big guy wants to enjoy and kind of showboat in reverse.
He walks without running, yeah.
I know, it's like he basically just admits the fact that they just showboated on him, and he's going to showboat them right back, which I thought was great.
Hey, come on, Mr. Carlson! Run! No, sir. I'm going to enjoy this. Save! I should hope so.
And then he crosses he crosses home plate, and the umpire goes safe, and he goes, I should hope so.
Even though it's actually quite close, because he's he's used up all his time.
He's totally smooth the entire way. He doesn't even pick up the pace near home plate. So, the big guy should have learned his lesson. He should not have been hubristic. He should not have showboated, because it could have gone horribly wrong, and we'd be stuck with a 9-9 game. They'd probably still be playing right now, actually, now that I think about it.
It's a lucky catch, Callahan.
You're going to get your clock clean today, Arthur.
We'll see about that.
Artie, we are the #1 radio station in this town, and we are certainly the #1 softball team.
Yeah, well, we happen to be the oldest radio station in this town. We're certainly the...
So, of course, the underdog sports story requires that the overdog, the top dog, be reprehensible, be totally hateful, and they locate all of that in the person of Clark Callahan and WPIG in general. So he plays his part as being so obnoxious and confident, and you have to hate him. And so, bringing in the outfield ahead of time is, just this very obnoxious thing to do. The backstory, or the gossip part of this, just to mention it, is that Clark Callahan is played by Ross Bickle, better known as Mr. Lonnie Anderson. This was Lonnie Anderson's second husband, her husband at the time that this episode was filmed. And Bickle had apparently auditioned for the role of Andy Travis, but didn't get it, obviously. And so that's Mr. Lonnie Anderson there, with the mustache being so obnoxious. And then, of course, as I think we mentioned in an earlier episode, Lonnie would leave Bickle about a year and a half later for Gary Sandy, right? And so I don't know, I don't know if there was any awkwardness or sexual tension by this point in the episode, but it might have added to just the fun there on that hot day on the ball field. The fact that, so if you're, if while you're cursing, ooh, that swine Clark Callahan while watching this episode, you can think to yourself, well, he's going to get his in more ways than one. She's going to leave him for Andy Travis of all people.
Smithers, it's almost game time. We're the devil in my ringers.
Sir, Mike Sosha may not live through the night. Steve Sachs is looking at 6 consecutive life sentences, and Ozzie Smith seems to have vanished off the face of the earth.
Cool. Well, what about Canseco?
The dryer goes on the right.
Yes, ma'am. What about Clemens?
Sir, he's in no condition to play.
That damn hypnotist.
So we mentioned this briefly a little earlier, Rob, but, again, baseball episodes of TV shows, it's a tried and true formula. I think the one that both of us I think everybody thinks it's the best baseball episode ever. It's Homer at the bat.
Yes. Yes.
Late 80s, early 90s, these baseball players were kind of like the ones that loomed large in everyone's imagination. They picked a really good team for that episode.
Because I'm not a big baseball guy. If you ask me to name famous baseball players, I'm going to say Darryl Strawberry, Wade Boggs, Jose Canseco, Steve Sachs, all the people in that episode.
Mattingly! I thought I told you to trim those sideburns. Go home! You're off the team for good!
Fine. I still like him better than Steinbrenner.
If I remember the story correctly, they recorded everybody's bits separately as they traveled into L.A., either to play the Angels or the Dodgers, and they'd get them in the studio real quick on their off day or whatever and get them to record their bits. So it was kind of cobbled together over a long period. You can remember basically what happened to each of them for them not to be able to end up at the game against Shelbyville, right? Like Ozzie Smith falls into a dimensional vortex
at the mystery spot. That's right. And
Ken Griffey, it's all in the song, obviously, but Ken Griffey drinks the nerve tonic that Mr. Burns gives him and grows a giant head. It's fantastic. And again, it's everybody poking fun at themselves. The one legend about the episode was that Jose Canseco did not want his character to do anything mean or bad.
Okay.
So they put him into that situation where he had to save everything in the woman's house from the fire.
Time. All right, time out.
What? I told you I couldn't pitch.
Oh, it's not about your pitching, Sam.
What are you doing out here?
I just always wanted to call a meeting on the mound. This is so cool.
So what are some other baseball episodes that you remember that kind of, hit that sweet spot of not being too much about baseball, but also having enough to be a baseball episode?
Yeah, well, the one that I thought about while watching this episode was and it's not a wholly baseball episode, but the baseball plot line in Freaks and Geeks. You remember the great Freaks and Geeks? And as you might expect, it actually hits very much the same kind of nerd versus sports spot as this episode of WKRP.
Yeah.
Now, this is just from memory, but, the geeks, the nerd characters are sick of being picked last, and there's a very painful scene of them, getting picked last. Talk about an iconic sort of bad childhood memory of sports is the going through the ritual of picking and therefore ranking everybody by their skill. And Bill, the great Martin Starr, he prank calls the coach, and that's a lot of the episode is he prank calls the coach. Oh, I'm blanking on his name, but of course the coach is a terrific character on Freaks and Geeks, a guy from Back to the Future. He's Biff from Back to the Future. Yeah, and he's great because he's both awful and yet they give him his humanity.
Absolutely,
on that show.
Listen to this. This is going to be good.
Hello?
Frederick? You're a turd, a stinky, fat turd. Go sniff a jockstrap, you poop head. You love patting boys' butts. You love patting boys' butts, you butt patter. You're a perv and a loser and a stinky turd.
Who's that?
Sam. It's an old friend.
Yeah, anyway, I'm not going to tell through a whole episode, but it leads to, for one game only, the coach lets Bill and Gordon, this other, the sort of nerdy fat kid that is kind of in their orbit, lets them be the team captains and them put everyone where. And Bill's line is basically exactly the same as Les's. He's like, maybe I'm really good. Maybe, I never get a chance to try. Maybe I'm actually really good at sports. And Bill really cares about sports in the same way. Actually, sidebar, I've often thought that Herb and Les occupy the same kind of iconic types of nerd as Neil and Bill on Freaks and Geeks.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, so you have the, you have the bespectacled, skinny, weirdo nerd, and then you have the kind of trying too hard, and that's Neil and Herb, right? And then those two archetypal ways of being the outsider. I've already spent a long time describing the episode, but the kind of the denouement is Sam, the main character, is pitching. He throws a pitch, and the jock at the plate hits. It's like a pop-up fly. And, it's just like the end of the WKRP episode, this whole big build-up, and it's going right to Bill, and Bill runs around, and he makes the catch, this sort of amazing, if kind of, awkward catch, and the theme from Rocky plays, and it's all, and it's super uplifting. And then Neil comes out and says, great catch, only 8 2/3 innings to go. Right? Because it's the first at bat. And that's all we see. We don't see the whole damn game. It's just, he gets that moment.
That might even be like a direct response to the WKRP episode almost.
It could be, because actually, man, I'm just remembering that another running joke in that episode is that every time they prank call Coach Fredericks, he's sitting at home watching different sitcoms. You hear like the theme song of all the different sitcoms he's watching. I don't think he's watching WKRP, but it's like,
and Freaks and Geeks takes place in 1980, 1981.
Right, exactly.
Which
takes place right in this era.
Yeah.
Look out! Herb Tarlick's selling life insurance, and he's headed this way.
Well, our second episode this week is Bad Risk. And in this episode, Herb starts moonlighting for an insurance company, selling insurance around the office and making a pest of himself. And we have a bunch of scenes of the DJs hiding in the booth to get away from Herb. But of course, he catches up to Les and sells Les a ton of insurance. And minutes later in screen time, Les has a huge off-screen accident with his news scooter, crashes his mobile news scooter through the front window of a British, for some reason, couple who are having tea. And it's just it's a strange episode. The denouement then is that I'm even finding it hard to summarize the episode because
I'm really glad you did it, because I couldn't. I have no idea how to even approach this thing.
Oh, good morning, Les. Are you feeling any better today?
No. And I wish you wouldn't say good morning. It's a lousy morning.
Okay. I guess I'm just an up person.
Why?
Now, Les, listen to me. You've got to stop being depressed over nothing. It's boring. You'll get over this. You always have.
Don't count on it.
Every cloud has a silver lining. It's always darkest just before the dawn. Pennies from heaven. All that sentimental malarkey's true.
Even though the plot would seem to be about Herb selling life insurance, there's this other thing. I won't call it a B plot, but there's like this other theme, this other note going through, which is that really what the episode is about is that Les is depressed.
Right.
And that the stress of his job is getting to him and the bad news in the world is getting to him. And, he says, everyone else has the luxury of turning off the news and he can't turn it off. And Les is struggling with his demons or something. But of course, the happy ending for Les is that the couple who he feels so bad about injuring can sue him, and he's got all this insurance, and so everyone is going to end up happy, except of course for Herb, who immediately gets fired from the insurance company.
Les, now you've been down in the dumps now for weeks. Did you ever seriously think about going to see a psychiatrist? Or some sort of professional help, like a therapist. Les, it's not all that bad. After 6 months of being here, I seriously thought about going to see...
You're gonna kill him if you keep that up.
It's a tough one to crack. Where do I even approach this from? It's like there's nowhere to grab on and start peeling this episode. It's impenetrable.
Yeah, which is not to say that it's terrible, but there's a weird darkness to it. I mean, is that fair? Because it's all centered around Les's depression, and yet they never entirely commit to making it about that.
Right.
That sort of like, people keep saying things like, "Oh, Les, you've been down in the dumps for weeks." Where does that come from? And then Andy tries to suggest to Les that maybe he should see a psychiatrist or a therapist, but that, doesn't go anywhere. Les reacts really badly to the suggestion. I know we're overthinking it, but that's what we do. There is this funny darkness to the episode that I don't feel is dispelled by the end.
No, it's not. If we talk about bright spots in the episode as far as like viewers and, us watching and having a chuckle are concerned, I think we both really, really liked the fact that Herb trying to sell insurance is like a monster out of a monster movie. And, they even lampshade it, right? Like Venus is like, he'd be the next guy to get it when Andy goes to look for him.
Well, looks like we're stuck in here forever, man.
Yeah. Sooner or later, we're going to run out of provisions, and then he's sure to get us.
It was the monster who sold life insurance.
Hey, you guys better stop these bull sessions in the booth, you know what I mean?
Look, man, this is serious, Travis. Something terrible has happened.
Yeah?
Herb is selling life insurance.
Where is he now?
In the bullpen. Yeah, we think he already got Les.
Well, listen, can he do that? Can he work at the station and sell life insurance at the same time?
I thought you were in charge here, man.
Huh? Oh. I lost control there for a second. Just for a second. All right, I'll go talk with him.
Okay. If this was a monster movie, he'd be the next guy that gets it.
Yeah.
There's also some sort of great moments where you're reminded of Turkeys Away. When Richard Sanders describes what happened, both as his accident unfolded and at the end of the episode when he loses Herb's boat on the highway.
His second accident. That's right.
It's a great reaction from the audience, and it is good, but it feels like they're going to the well of us not seeing something and then having Richard Sanders kind of have his shaky voice description of it.
Lester, tell us exactly what happened.
Well, I had the mobile news scooter up to about 40 miles an hour. I was on my way to an important City Hall news conference. And I went to turn, and suddenly I lost control. I went one way, and the scooter went... Well, it went...
Where did the scooter go, Les?
Into this house. Actually, it kind of spun around the porch for a while, and then it gathered itself together and went straight through a window.
Can't listen to any more of this.
Bounced through the living room, into the kitchen, and struck a Mr. and Mrs. J. Garnet Hopkins as they were having tea.
It's very similar to that scene. He comes in all bedraggled, wearing that big poncho all torn up. And then, the off-screen comedy, which Sanders can do, as we've seen, that shouldn't work. Show, don't tell, but he totally makes it work. But it is very reminiscent of the Turkeys.
The other sort of thread of darkness going through this episode, apart from Les's apparent depression, is that, Herb's doing this to make a little extra money, and you hear every sort of like weight of the economic malaise going on right now on Herb's shoulders, because he wants to give his family a life with all the little extras, right? Being able to take him on vacation and but he can't do that on his salary. And again, as Andy and the big guy say, maybe you should sell what you're supposed to sell, which is ad time on the station rather than trying to sell insurance.
Yeah, poor Herb. Well, then just to add to that, this kind of running current of depression, the joke about the couple, what's their name? The
Hopkins couple, yes.
The joke about the Hopkinses is that they're miserable and that their married life has been nothing but misery, even though they seem perfectly cheerful together, that they're miserable.
Well, let me tell the three of you something. Every cloud has a silver lining.
Oh, Herb, don't give us that nonsense.
And it is nonsense. Every cloud has a silver lining.
Rubbish.
Why, even before this happened, we were never happy. Were we, dearie?
No. Our life together has been one bad dream.
They should have never moved from England to Cincinnati. That's the problem.
That's their problem. And have you seen Inside Out?
I have not seen Inside Out yet.
Okay,
no.
So, I have the kids. We see all the Pixar movies.
Sure.
And without putting too much time on that tangent, the theme of Inside Out is that we need sorrow as well as joy.
Mhm.
And there's a key moment where the joy character inside the girl's head tries to cheer up some other figment of the kid's imagination by being happy, and it doesn't work. And then the sorrow character just sits there and listens and is sad with them. And of course, sometimes that's what people who are sad need,
Yes.
right? It's very, it's very sweetly done. That's kind of almost what happens here. Is that
Right.
is that Herb, the Hopkinses immediately take a dislike to Herb, and yet immediately take a liking to Les, because they recognize in him this sort of kindred spirit with the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Well, I know I've had a miserable life, too. One thing after another. It's just...
Oh, really? Sit down, Les.
Thank you.
You know what we call problems in sales? We call them opportunities.
Les, your friend is a twit.
But even the Hopkinses don't have a kind of steady characterization, because they're vengeful one moment and then obsequious the next so they can get the money. And like in that 5 minutes in that hospital room, you go through all these different like iterations of it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, the wife is hitting on Herb. And I kept thinking to myself, did she get some pain drugs? Like, did she self-administer some morphine at that point? And is she completely out of her mind?
Yeah, I mean, we love this. This makes me think of Lenore talking last week about, loving a show, warts and all. We love this show, but sometimes it does seem like it was kind of taped together by people who heard about what a TV show was. And it's just very strange.
First attempt on President Ford's life was 18 days ago, and again yesterday in San Francisco. In spite of the two attempts, Mr. Ford says he will not become a prisoner of the Oval Office, a hostage of would-be assassins.
Cue, Howard.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like at this moment to announce that I will be retiring from this program in 2 weeks' time because of poor ratings. Since this show was the only thing I had going for me in my life, I have decided to kill myself.
So what'd she say?
I'm going to blow my brains out right on this program a week from today.
10 seconds to commercial.
Oh, tune in next Tuesday. That should give the public relations people a week to promote the show. We ought to get a hell of a rating out of that.
Walt,
A 50 share. Easy.
Take Telecity.
When you're having
Listen,
a great time.
Did you hear that?
What was that about?
Howard just said he was going to blow his brains out next Tuesday.
The idea of a newsman who's going to crack because of the pressure of his job or because of the fact he's going to deal with all this bad news, it's not without precedent, because one of the sort of biggest movies of the 1970s, Network, has that as its central conceit, which is that Howard Beale can't, deal with the network and like the news stories he's got to report on, and he just cracks up on the air. And like, so there is this sense that the news has been so bad through the 70s that Les is finally cracking. I guess I can kind of see it, but the thing is, he's got different kinds of mental illness and different issues depending on whatever episode it is. I mean, if you think about Les on a Ledge, being suicidal, being on the side of a building, I mean, that's a big deal. We talked about it during that episode. We said, nothing ever happens after this. He doesn't get looked after. He doesn't get committed. That's not realistic. And if Les is kind of this personality who can't deal with the reality of the world around him, we have to be worried about him, right? I mean, it's a trend. I think it's a trend for the character over the course of the show.
Absolutely. I mean, we're also just bumping up once again against our expectations about how serialized a TV show is. So, if someone's threatening to kill themselves in one episode, we want to know the following week, well, how's that working out for them? Just as we wonder, well, what's happening with Johnny and Bailey right now? Are they on or off? And even just a throwaway line, like in this episode, they say, Les, you've been down in the dumps for weeks. I know it's silly to expect that the show to all fit together in a seamless web of that verisimilitude, but I think, well, he seemed happy enough after the baseball game last week. Like, we had a conversation back when we did the clip show I went off on a little riff about how much time passes while someone is remembering a clip. And I had a whole little reverie about that, talking to you and Chris Tatro, and then it turned out that we had technical difficulties and that whole bit got lost. We never used it. But now I have a similar question, which is how much time passes between episodes of a sitcom? And is it just, a week and then another week and then another week? Or are all these things kind of stitched in together? Like, has Les been depressed for a few weeks, including the week of the baseball game? Or was that months ago?
Yeah.
Oh, it's all ego, Mr. Carlson. Ego, pride, hubris. I have to be the #1 electronic journalist in this town. And I don't care who gets hurt along the way. Get in my way, you get stepped on. He wanted success, and he'd get it, no matter how. You don't think that's true, Jennifer?
Oh, yes, Les, I do.
It's true. I've always liked you, Jennifer. More than you'll ever never, ever know.
Oh, yes. I'll see you tomorrow.
I don't think so, Jennifer.
Les, it was an accident. Accidents are accidents. That's why they call them that.
You know what apologetics are,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
So, apologetics is apologizing for something technically, but the tradition of like Christian apologetics are sort of arguments in justification or explaining the things in the Bible that don't seem to make sense. There's a long, 1,000-year tradition of Christian apologetics, explaining the things that don't make sense and saying, no, this book that might on the surface appear to be a crazy mishmash of things that don't fit together is actually one seamless whole, right? So even though I know it's pointless, I cannot resist the impulse to sort of do WKRP apologetics. In other words, to try and make it all one coherent, seamless narrative. And so for this episode, I mean, what I want is I want a kind of diagnosis of Les that, that somehow encompasses and explains his behavior in Bad Risk and his behavior on Les on a Ledge and his behavior in baseball and like what is going on in Les's head.
Okay, I have actually a theory on this, and it's something that I've kind of brought back to myself over and over whenever we've seen Les act, again, off the wall, essentially. I think he's got like histrionic and borderline personality disorder. I think he is naturally attention seeking. His behavior is sometimes completely over the top from what the stimulus was. His response is way, way, way off the charts compared to what has actually happened to him. And I think it also comes out in a lot of the ways, like we've talked about how there have been so many episodes, the one where Herb and Lucille split up, the one where he goes on a date with Jennifer, where he gets the last word, right?
Yes.
And he gets a very, very funny line that tells us that Les is not as innocent as he pretends to be.
Uh-huh.
It's happened in a lot of situations, and we've joked about it in the sense that we think he's, secretly
70s, a swinger,
70s
or secretly
bisexual swinger. Exactly.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That I think that his sexuality is not separate from all of this.
Exactly.
That might be one way of explaining why sometimes he seems to be, he's terrified to ask a woman out on a date, and other times we get this implication that he's getting his on the outside, and
Yeah, exactly. So I would need to kind of go back and read definitions, but even more so than Herb. Herb often makes a spectacle of himself. But I don't feel like he's ever doing it for any other reason than the reason he says he is. You know what I mean? Like, I want to flirt with Jennifer. I kind of want to make her squirm. Like, there is no, cloaking there. That is basically what he wants to do.
There's a spectrum of sort of jerk to humanity on Herb, but there's not really much mystery about where Herb is coming from. We get it.
With Les, I feel there's always these depths that we can't see, and I think part of it is this idea that it's not a Jekyll and Hyde situation, again, not to prefigure the Dr. Fever. And yeah, exactly. But like, I think that there is this sort of sense that he has, and we could talk about his mother, and we could talk about in future episodes how he becomes this Norman Bates type, which I never really liked. I think that's too easy an explanation. But the idea that maybe he wanted to be the big man on campus, playing baseball and like doing all this stuff, but there were these forces that kept him all bottled up. And he rebels against that in these very strange sort of attention-seeking ways.
Yeah.
I feel like Les has and again, to get in front of a microphone and broadcast to thousands of people is an attention-seeking behavior. And it's sort of like he wants all eyes on him. He wants all ears listening to him. And remember, one of the things that gets him really upset is when people don't know who he is.
Yes.
When people make fun of his news reports, like the WPIG pig did, that gets him to put up his dukes and like get into a fight. So I think he's got a strong ego, but he's also got a lot of internal conflict about how that ego shows itself.
That's very good. And just to recap for our listeners, we are talking about Les Nessman, not ourselves.
That's correct, yes. We've talked about us identifying with Les on the level of him being like a conspiracy theorist and stuff like that. And that's another great shorthand way for a sitcom of this era to make sure you know somebody's crazy, right? Like, he believes in the Trilateral Commission, or Levi Strauss is like secretly like a conspiracy to like turn people into dungarees. But like, and we joke about that and we love that he sees conspiracy and everything, but I wonder if even that has something to do with whatever we're going to call his particular brand of mental illness, because again, it's kind of looking for, what's the word? It's not histrionic, but it's like, it's looking for, it's looking to be more important in your own story. It's sort of like the classic sort of like...
Yeah, conspiracy-themed paranoia is a very kind of narcissistic thing because you are the one person who knows the truth. Mm-hmm. Everyone is out to get you. The things fit very well together.
That's another great example of him being like self-aggrandizing, was his little narration about... He even uses the third person, I think, doesn't he? When he's like talking about like a newsman, like...
I've become the bad news I was supposed to report.
You see Lonnie Anderson kind of semi-break, it almost seems.
Yeah,
like.
Corpsing, right? Is that what they call it when you start laughing on stage? Do you think she's really corpsing there, or is she...
It seemed pretty authentic to me. I mean, just like looking at the look on her face, it was like she was trying to keep it under control, but she knew her next line was to kind of humor Les and to make sure that... And that was the other thing. He confesses his secret love for Jennifer when he leaves the big guy's office. Like, I've always liked you, Jennifer. But again, how much is that just him trying to get attention again? You know what I mean?
Another thread that just hangs in the air and then never is going to be...
But again, he does it with an audience. He doesn't do it just him and Jennifer. He does it with other people watching, so...
You drove all the way over there and Charlie wasn't there?
No, I asked for Charlie, but the guy's name was Wally.
Well, where was Charlie?
I'm telling you, man, there is no Charlie.
Well, who is Wally?
That's the guy who didn't know who Charlie was.
You asked in the notes, are Johnny and Venus discussing a drug deal at the start of the episode?
Yeah, because it's that whole thing where you come into like, so I says to Mabel, but like...
Charlie and Manny or whatever they are.
It sounded like that to me. Again, maybe that's just me like projecting, but like, it sounds like Johnny was trying to hook Venus up with somebody.
Yeah.
But Venus didn't know them, so like it was very strange. I was trying to decipher exactly what that was meant to convey, and my thought was, Johnny was hooking him up with his dealer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this is the whole game that Howard Hessman played, I think, through the whole series, was to try and sneak as many drug references in under the noses of the censors.
Yeah.
In the baseball episode, there's a moment where Johnny's sitting down on first base and he picks up and sniffs the chalk dust, right? And apparently that was taken out in syndication because of the perceived drug. Well, it's not perceived. I mean, why would you sniff the chalk dust? But because of the drug reference.
I'm really curious about one thing. What kind of an insurance company would hire a fellow like you?
What kind of a question is that? I got my license years ago, pal.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, that was rude.
A very special life insurance company, as a matter of fact. One that has been featured on 60 Minutes, in which Mr. Mike Wallace and the whole gang marched right into the offices and everything. Twice.
So we haven't said a whole lot about Herb and his insurance company and that whole aspect of the episode. You can take it as a given, if they've hired Herb as a salesman, what sort of insurance company this is. And indeed, Andy asks, what kind of insurance company would hire you? And
good line. I like that one.
Herb gets all offended and says, it was featured on 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes marched into their offices twice. Which, if you are watching this in 2015, that might need a little unpacking. What does it mean for an insurance company to be featured on 60 Minutes, Mike?
It's a great line because I kind of remember that era. Sunday nights, 7 o'clock, CBS, you would be treated to an hour-long series, maybe not every single segment on 60 Minutes, but they often did these investigative reporting pieces, and they were often on corrupt businesses, especially ones that had a nationwide reach, or even whole industries, basically. And they would often lead off the hour with this kind of story. Their sort of mandate under Mike Wallace's reign was to be the sort of national par excellence investigative reporters. I mean, if you've watched the movie The Insider, right, about the tobacco industry, in the late 80s, they were really crusading on the idea that these tobacco companies had been lying to the American people for decades and decades. So the idea of 60 Minutes and your business being featured on there is not a positive. It is a negative, in fact. But 60 Minutes was a real cultural touchstone at this point in history. You could see why somebody who's middle America like Herb would actually be proud to say that the insurance company, even though it's corrupt, appeared on 60 Minutes, because everybody would be able to get, 60 Minutes.
Ooh, 60 Minutes. Ooh, yeah.
But then you think about it for a moment and you're like, no, that's actually not very good at all. That should not be something I look for in a insurance company. We talked about, I think, during the Ferriman Funeral Home episode that 60 Minutes, during its history, had done a bunch of exposés on the funeral home industry.
On the funeral industry.
Yeah, which is another one of those nationwide industries that would be very easy to find sort of that pattern of corruption in. And I think insurance actually does fit pretty well. I mean, it would be very easy to find some, old lady in somewhere like Cincinnati and say, what happened when you tried to claim your claim from this insurance company? So it makes total sense.
Was 60 Minutes always associated with older viewers, or is that something that just because it was around so long, it became something?
I think that it was always associated with having an older audience because CBS had an older audience. I mean, WKRP, that's got to be one of the reasons why it stuck around and why they tried to sculpt programming around it. Is because it got a younger audience,
Right. That's part of the poor fit is that CBS wanted a youth show. They wanted WKRP to be their youth show, but they and Hugh Wilson had different ideas of what a youth show means. They wanted it at 8 and they wanted it kid friendly.
Yeah.
That was a continuing struggle for KRP on CBS.
Well, what's really funny now that I'm realizing this is that essentially Herb's mention of 60 Minutes is almost a commercial for 60 Minutes.
That's right. It's the same network, CBS so it's cross promotion.
I'm Mike Wallace. The novelty store or joke shop may seem like the home of innocent fun, but according to the Consumer Product Safety Commission, it may more often be the cause of serious, even permanent injury. Defective novelties are showing up on American shelves in ever-increasing numbers.
Mr. Thurm, let's be honest. We've seen your people working for pennies, making defective novelty items which at best don't work and don't provide hours of family fun, and at worst are creating serious injury.
So what are you saying?
Saying that your boss, Mr. Lee, is in effect the Mr. Big of the pirate novelty business.
No, he isn't. You're just saying that to get a higher rating on your TV show. Why are you pointing the finger at other people all the time? Why don't you point the finger at yourself? Do a little more reading, maybe. Less time in court. Maybe that would be effective for you.
Pardon me for saying this, but you seem defensive.
I'm not being defensive. You're the one who's being defensive. Why is it always the other person who's being defensive? Have you ever asked yourself that? Why don't you ask yourself that?
This is an affidavit.
I know that.
Well, let me finish. This is an affidavit from a woman who's got severe nerve damage on her upper thighs from sitting on one of your defective whoopee cushions. Here, read it. Well, I have read it.
So why do I have to read it?
Well, it does pertain to your company.
I know that. Why wouldn't I know that? It's my company. I'm quite aware of that. Is it me? It's him, right?
Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back soon with more WKRP riffs and memories. If you like this well enough to listen to the whole thing, tell somebody about it.
We're online at holdmyorderterribledresser.com, which, believe it or not, wasn't taken. We're also available on iTunes, and we always appreciate your iTunes subscriptions, reviews, ratings, and downloads. So get on there and give us some stars.
Good day, and may the good news be yours.
If you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air in Cincinnati, WKRP. I'm at WKRP in Cincinnati.